27 other people there. Oh, Poppy joined.
Yay.
Yay.
And
Margaret Nettleton.
Right here.
This is the guy, Steve.
Yeah. Put it up here so I can see.
Let's see.
Multi-speaker. Yeah. Try again.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome back to our Lifelong Learning Lecture Series. This is the first in our Spring 2025 series, and we are very pleased to have with us tonight Dr. Steve Courchesne. I got that right, I think. Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Design at Framingham State University, and he's here tonight to talk to us about his lecture, AI is My Partner in Creativity.
AI. You want to hear? This is the lecture about AI.
And sorry, I'm going to have to mute a few people.
I think with that, I'll get started. So hi, everybody. It's such a great, I'm so great to see all of you joining us today. As I was introduced, I'm the Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Design at Framingham State. And in that role, I get to play and explore with tools related to AI and technology all day. And I get to do that in a variety of ways. When I'm sitting at my desk and trying to solve a problem, I might consult with an AI tool to try and figure out the answer to a question or to investigate something. If I also do this in research. I have a partner, Dr. Wardell Powell, and we've been investigating different ways that you can use AI to help teachers to do lesson planning. And then I do it in my personal life as well. Sometimes I just have a question or an idea and I want to explore it. And so I really have been exploring AI tools for the past year and a half. And today's goal is to really look at some of the ways that I've been exploring creativity with AI. And so I want to get started with a particular question. And so if you know how to use the chat box in a Zoom meeting, you can basically, at the very bottom of your screen, you might see an icon that says chat with some speech bubbles. And if you click onto that, you'll open up a panel that has a little text box where you can type a message in. And so if you would be willing to, I would like to hear some answers to this question. What emotions do you tap into when you think about artificial intelligence? What do you feel when you think about the concept of artificial intelligence? And I'll say right now that I welcome folks typing into the chat throughout the session if you like, but I think we're going to hold verbal questions till the very end of the session. So if you do have any questions, take a note, and then at the end, I'm going to open it up to Q&A, and you can answer, and we can have a conversation. Seeing some messages come in now. So I see excited, enthused, concerned. I also see frightened, confusion, unsure, meaning the feeling of being unsure, anxiety, quizzical. So it's concerned for misuse, rational aspiration, skeptical, curious. So these are all kinds of emotions that I also feel when I think about AI. I mean, if we think about it, we've been thinking about artificial intelligence for decades now. You go back to novels, going back to the early 20th century. We have movies over the course of the past decades. And you might think of AI and at your darkest, you might think about something like HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the AI computer basically stopped listening to the humans on the spaceship and, basically had its own agenda and was not following orders. And that sort of taps into a fear that we have that, AI is going to be this kind of alien intelligence that's going to kind of hate us and is gonna not like us. And so that's a kind of a fear that we have, that it's going to take over. On the other hand, I think about R2-D2 in Star Wars and how, this was an intrepid, loyal, intelligent, funny companion to the team, and indeed, an AI also. So really, we can feel a spectrum of feelings related to AI, and they can range from positive to negative to, as some of you have pointed out, confusion, right? Because we're not quite sure where we are right now or where we're going. So I actually think, though, if we're talking about movies right now, that the one that really captures the moment that we're at would be Her, which came out in 2013, starring Joaquin Phoenix, pictured on the screen. And in that movie, Joaquin Phoenix's character is a creative type who works for a company that essentially writes greeting cards and letters on behalf of customers. So let's imagine I'm a father who wants to write a congratulations letter or card to my daughter who's just graduating from college, and I want it to sound good. I want it to be personal, but I don't trust my own skills with writing. And so, people would hire this individual, this company, to write a really nice card for them. And in the movie, we really see the kind of the relationship develop between the AI and the human, and how they work together to create these cards and letters on behalf of their customers. So, so it makes me think, like, that's where we are right now, is with this ability to interface with artificial intelligence. We can ask questions, we can write things and get responses back. And I'll be showing you in just a moment what that can look like. But what does that mean? So I think that what we'll start by doing is just testing it out a little bit. So I'm going to switch over to a tool called ChatGPT. There are many different AI tools out there. Some of them do very different things from each other, but ChatGPT is the most famous of the bunch, so we're going to use that one today. And it's also the one that I've used the most myself. And you can see that I'm at chatgpt.com. So anybody can go to that website, and you can actually start chatting with ChatGPT right away. You actually don't even need to create an account with ChatGPT. You can just sort of start writing. But there is an advantage to creating an account, because once you do, it keeps a history of all your past chats. And if you want to be able to go back and look at something that you already did, it can be very helpful. And what you can see also here is that it's really just a simple text box where I can enter information. I can attach files, I can view the tools, I can search, I can create images, it can help me write, I can analyze images, and more. I see a question in the chat: who owns ChatGPT? ChatGPT is owned by a company called OpenAI, which is actually a nonprofit organization, but that has a lot of funders. In fact, Microsoft is the most important of those funders. And so the question is whether OpenAI is going to remain a nonprofit, or if it's going to, turn corporate. That's to be determined. But there's lots of other companies that own other generative AI tools. Google has its own. Microsoft has a separate one, and there's dozens and dozens of others. So I'm going to go ahead and analyze an image. I'm going to upload a picture that I have, and I'm going to ask it to help me identify plants in the image. So, it brings up this prompt. Yes, I can help you identify. So it says, please upload the image, and I'll take a look. So let me attach the picture from my computer. Go. So I've given ChatGPT this picture, and it says, oh, this image appears to show a type of coral, not a plant. Specifically, the large, flat, table-like structure is a characteristic of table coral, which belongs to the genus Acropora. Corals are marine invertebrates, not plants, although they host symbiotic algae that perform photosynthesis. So it says, let me know if you'd like to learn more about this coral or need help with anything. So I could ask a question like, I could say, tell me more about the symbiotic algae. And so it goes on to define and explain the symbiotic algae, what its benefits are for the coral, the benefits to the algae, the importance of their symbiotic relationship. And I'm not going to read it all. It would take too long. I just want to give you a flavor of what it can look like. So now I could say something like, write a poem about table coral that includes a shark and a clownfish. So the table coral's realm, beneath the waves where sunlight gleams, a table coral spreads its dreams. Its branches wide, a throne of grace, a kingdom built in ocean's embrace. A clownfish darts, a flash of gold, among the arms so strong, so bold. Its home, a fortress from the deep, a haven safe where secrets sleep. A shadow glides, sleek, sharp, and gray. A shark patrols the reef's ballet. Its movements smooth, a hunter's art, yet peace resides within its heart. Together here they share the sea, a world of fragile harmony. The coral stands a steadfast guard, life's delicate beauty forever starred, but whisper soft of warming tide, of bleaching pale where colors hide. Let us protect this vibrant place, the coral's realm, our ocean's grace. So maybe not the best poem, but it made this up right off, within seconds. And I've done this experiment with this, by pasting the table coral and then asking it a few follow-up questions a bunch of times. And every time it writes a different poem. Some aspects seem to be repeated each time I do it. Like, the shark is always kind of like looming, and the clownfish is always playing. But essentially, it just makes something up right off the top. So I could keep going. I could keep asking it more and more questions and following up. I could say, okay, I don't really like the structure of this poem. Can you put it in iambic pentameter, or can you make it a haiku? And it will do that. It will create it. It might not always create the best result. It might not always do something better than maybe I could do, but it does it very quickly, and it pretty accurately will do things. Now, one thing to be mindful of is that AI can be creative, and therefore it can be wrong. It can also make stuff up. There's a history over the last few years of people asking AI to generate essays with citations, and some of those citations can be simply made up. And I've had my own experience with that in experiments. But what I did do is I checked and I verified that this is in fact a table coral. I checked the National Oceanographic Institute, and I checked Wikipedia, and I also basically did a Google search for table coral and found plenty of examples that were very similar to that. So one lesson for us all is to always be critical and careful about any information that we get from the AI. It's not always going to be accurate, although it does often tend to be. So let me head back to my presentation, because I think that, if you're looking at what I just did and thinking, wow, how does it do that? How does it actually produce these answers so quickly? And it just makes these things up and gives you, and whatever I ask, it'll just come up with it within seconds. I think it's useful for us to think a little bit about, how has AI developed exactly, and what is it doing? So before ChatGPT came out in November 2022, we did already have AI under development, and there were lots of tools being used, especially for things like predictive analytics. So when you think about when you're typing a chat message and on your phone, like a text message, and as you're typing, it starts to sort of predict what your next word might want to be, and you can select it, or you can see on screen, it does that when you Google search something as well. That's an autocomplete, right? It's predicting what it thinks you are going to want to say next. And sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. But the other aspect of that predictive analytics is that, like, lots of companies have been harnessing this for a couple of decades to help with business processes. So Amazon, for example, became one of the largest companies in the world on the back of predictive analytics. It's able to do an amazing job at predicting what stocks to hold in its warehouses, how to deliver goods as efficiently as possible. I think we take for granted now that you can order something on Amazon and the next day you get it pretty reliably. So AI is not something that has just popped out of nowhere. It's been something that's been under development for decades. But in the older versions of AI, before the advent of generative AI that we're seeing with tools like ChatGPT, the way that AI would get trained would be with labeled data. So imagine we take a picture of my face and we upload that into the program and we say, this is a face. And so you do this a bunch of times, enough so that eventually the program is able to say, okay, that's a face. And so, facial recognition software that airports are using and the FBI is using and the CIA is using is working with that type of technology. They've trained the software to know what is a face and what are the characteristics of that. But what's different now, what's changed, what's revolutionized the development of AI is that we now can train the AI on unlabeled data. So what that means is you don't have to spend a lot of time labeling all your data, which really limits how much of that you can do. So it limits how much training data you can put into the system. So now you're able to upload everything. So GPT-3, which is an older version of ChatGPT, was trained on 45 terabytes of textual data. That's more than 12 trillion words. So think about that, 12 trillion words. And that information gets processed. So the computer program is able to recognize patterns, discern the structures that are in the data, to consider the context of what's being said, of the sentences, of the paragraphs, of the words connecting to the words, and it encodes those connections between those words. And so what it does is it then creates a whole series of parameters, like this word tends to follow this word, and when they're in this order, it means this. But if I reverse the order, it means something different. And GPT-3 had 175 billion parameters. GPT-4, which is a more recent version, has about 1.76 trillion parameters. So that's what the large language model is, the LLM. It is sitting there with 1.76 trillion different parameters that it uses every time you ask a question to determine what word follows what word. So it's able very, very, very quickly to simply figure out what you're trying to say and produce the text that you want. And it's able to process things at the same time. So it'll write an essay at the same time. It's writing the last words of the essay at the same time that it's writing the first words of the essay. So that's why it's able to operate so quickly. And, within seconds, it's producing, substantive stuff. So one word to mention too, to put this into context, is that these parameters and weights are called tokens. So a token is a word or a part of a word, and then the parameters are trying to connect all these together. So Bowen and Watson said the T in ChatGPT, which stands for transformers, it allows an AI to look not just at the probability of the next token or the next word, but at multiple combinations of tokens and larger patterns all at once. So that's to say that the AI of today is vastly superior to the AI of just 5 or 10 years ago. But remember, it's still autocomplete. It is still requiring me to say something, right? I have to type something in. I have to give it a file. I have to do something first, and it can only react to that. Because what it's doing is it's taking whatever I say and then doing that autocomplete. It's figuring out what the next thing should be. It's just gotten so good at that that it doesn't just predict the next word, it can predict much, much more based on what I say. But I have concerns. I would put these concerns into three categories. One is environmental. There's the concern about copyright and how the data is trained and how the large language models are trained. And I'm concerned that we're going to stop thinking. And that I'm going to treat each of these three in turn. And then once we do that, I'll feel comfortable moving on and talking about how I use it creatively, because I think it's important for us to be aware of these concerns as we embark on trying out these tools. So first, the environmental concern. I think of it in terms of the training as well as in terms of the querying, when you actually ask a question. So to train GPT-4, which is one of the more recent versions, that required over 50 gigawatt hours of electricity. And that could power approximately 5,000 homes for a year. That's a lot of electricity. And that's just for one model. Many companies are developing their own models. And each time they develop a new model, the model gets much bigger. And so the amount of power that this is taking is dramatically increasing. That's why you may have read in the news that Microsoft is trying to get that 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor back online in Pennsylvania, because they're going to put a data farm right next to it, and that will power it. Google is in the works with a nuclear power startup to build micro nuclear reactors, again, to power their server farms that are doing all of this work. Because the companies that are developing these tools are also concerned about the environmental impact. They don't want to contribute to climate change by increasing the amount of carbon dioxide emissions going into the air. So they're looking at ways that we can generate electricity in a carbon neutral way. The second way that we're using a lot of electricity is every time we say something to the AI. So if you just watched me, do a few prompts, and each one requires about 10 times as much electricity as a Google search. So, we have hundreds of millions of people using AI now. And if people are doing multiple searches or multiple queries in a day, that's really going to add up over time. We're talking about an enormous amount of electricity. So one thing you can consider, if this is a concern for you, is to differentiate when it's appropriate to use AI versus some other way to get the information that's maybe more simple. So, for example, if I want to find out what the capital of Azerbaijan is, I can do a Google search instead, and I'll get the answer just as quickly and effectively as talking to ChatGPT. If I want to find out who won the game last night, I can do it a different way. Try and think about using generative AI when you want to have a deeper conversation or want to have something a little bit more complicated than that. And that way, at least, we're going to be a little bit more judicious in whether we're, using as much electricity or not. Martin asked, is ChatGPT private? And yes, it currently is. It's actually a nonprofit organization, but has investment from multiple corporations, including, most importantly, Microsoft. The second concern that I have is regarding copyright. So if you are somebody who writes or who produces music, or you're a journalist, then you might be concerned about the fact that the data that's being taken and fed into these models is coming from all sorts of sources, many of which are public domain and open. In fact, some of the interesting sources include things like the entire Enron email history, because of the court case, right, related to Enron's malfeasance. The email, the body of emails from the company are kind of like public domain, and so that kind of thing gets fed in. There's apparently an enormous amount of amateur romance novel writing out there on the web, and that gets hoovered up. But it's also known that they're hoovering up things like New York Times articles and novels and music lyrics and all sorts of things. And this has a lot of creative types kind of upset because they have not provided their permission for that. It's complicated because the argument that the AI companies make is that it's fair use because they are not actually querying your novel every time somebody does a chat. When somebody does a chat, it's not going to your novel and grabbing the information and inserting it. Your novel might have been used to create those parameters that are then generating the responses. So according to Microsoft or Google or OpenAI, the information is fair use. They can use it. It's not a copyright violation. But many disagree. So there's a whole number of court cases that are in process right now, and I think this year we're probably going to see some movement that's going to, change things. Potentially, they'll get permission to keep doing it, or we might find that they're going to have to start paying for the data, which might slow down the development of the AI tools. Because, of course, the more data they can feed into these models, the more stuff they can put in, the better their models can get. So it's in their interest to just hoover it all up as much as they can. So we'll see. The third concern is actually the one that I think is the most important. It's the one that I'm the most concerned about, and maybe that's because I work in education, but I'm worried about the no human in the loop aspect of things. The ideal way that we use these tools is, we start with step one, we prompt the AI. I have a question, I ask it, or I ask it to generate a memo for me, for work or something like that. Then the second step should be that I critically analyze what it gives me. I think about it, I consider its accuracy, I consider whether it's complete and fulfilling my need, and I might need to elaborate on whatever it gives me. And then after I do that, after I edit it and fix it up and make it better and make it appropriate, I then make that final product, step three. But the danger is that people skip from step one right to step three. They prompt the AI gives them a response, and they just copy and paste that straight into whatever they're doing. So professors at my university, but also across the world, are concerned that students are going to do this, right? I'm going to plug the assignment instructions in, and it's going to produce a fully formed essay, that might even be better than what I could have made myself. And I'm just going to submit that as if it were my own work. And to me, obviously that's plagiarism in a way, right? I mean, you're not plagiarizing a specific source, but it's in the spirit of plagiarism. You're basically passing off something else that was created for your own. But I think more importantly, it's a problem of circumventing the thinking process. We want students to learn how to think. We want them to be critical. We want them to learn the material. And if they're not actually reading and writing, they're not learning. And so, we're all concerned about, this as a threat. But it's not just about students and circumventing the learning process. People are using these tools in their workplaces as well and doing the same kind of thing. There's a pretty famous example where a lawyer submitted a brief and had cited a bunch of cases, and they were made up, and they weren't real, and that lawyer got into a lot of trouble, and lots of other situations where similar things are happening. So Ethan Mollick said, when we use AI to generate our first drafts, we tend to anchor on the first idea that the machine produces, which influences our future work. So think about that for a second, right? When somebody gives you a first answer, you tend to stick with that, and it limits maybe your creativity or limits your thinking around that as you move forward. So we really want to be careful that we don't limit ourselves and we don't kind of become more mediocre as humans because we're relying on and kind of dependent on the AI to solve all our problems.
Stephen, can I interrupt you for a moment?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think you've already half answered this question from Gary, but he asked if AI is good for doctors or lawyers, and I think you've already mentioned how the risk is for lawyers, but what about doctors?
Oh, great question. I don't know too much about for doctors. That's a good question. I do know that you can ask it questions and it will often be able to accurately do things, but it's dangerous, right? Because the medical information is so, if you're wrong about it, you can have such dire consequences. But I think I can say that AI is being used in medical situations a lot in terms of a diagnosis and being able to read things. So like it's been shown in studies that AI can be more effective than doctors at reading scans and accurately identifying what's going on in whether it's a brain scan or an X-ray or whatever the case may be. So, the question is whether radiologists are going to have, a career in the future beyond sort of actually physically doing the scan. So I do know that in medicine, that's one aspect. And a second aspect is that it's being used a lot in terms of the development and research side of things. So AI has the ability to analyze data at a rate that far surpasses what a human can do. And so, in the medical research, they're able to, theoretically assess such a wider variety of drugs under development than would otherwise be possible. So AI is coming into it very much in that way. But in terms of like using generative AI the way I did earlier, like asking it questions and getting answers, I don't really have much of a background in terms of what that looks like for doctors. That's a good question. Good thing to follow up on. So, who is more creative, people or AI, right? That's the debate. And it's an interesting question because the AI does have certain advantages over people. One is that people naturally have really have limitations in how we think, right? We naturally live in kind of boxes in our minds. We have cultural norms, right? There's certain things that we make assumptions about and we assume are true, and that's not necessarily going to be true for the AI. Secondly, the AI never gets tired. So, I can follow up, ask a question, get it to give me 1,000 ideas, then give me 10 more, and then give me 100 more. It will never, ever, ever complain that it's bored or tired of your questions. It can go on and on. So an advantage of the AI is that it really has the capacity to just generate vast amounts of information and keep going, keep going. So, so the question is then, if we're talking about divergent thinking, right? Thinking so that we get different answers. What is the case? And there's some research that's coming out because folks are testing the differences between how humans perform on divergent thinking tasks and how AI performs. And in this study that I put up on screen from David Cropley, he took a sample of 65,000 human responses to the divergent association task and then ran ChatGPT 3.5 and GPT-4 through about, I think, 105 iterations of that same test, and then compared how well humans did versus the two versions of GPT. And what he found is that on average, the AI performed better, was able to more easily come up with a variety of, and I forgot to mention the test, the divergent association test. It asks you to come up with 10 words that are as completely different from each other as possible. So you're most successful on the test if you can come up with 10 words that are very unrelated from each other. And so this is where the AI can do better than humans. But in his study, he pointed out that there are some things to consider. So one is that it is a spectrum. So it's not that the AI always performed better than the humans. It was on average. So many humans also performed better than some of the AI iterations because there was like 105 of the ChatGPT iterations. So there was an overlap between those curves. Secondly, he noted that there tended to be more similarity in the words, like repeated words that were used across the AI responses. For example, animals were overrepresented. Like most of the responses had animals in them, whereas the human ones not necessarily. So, you could say that maybe as a takeaway that yes, the AI can very quickly come up with many different ideas, but it's going to potentially be somewhat generic. And so that leaves a lot of space for humans to operate within that and to maybe use it to leverage it. But again, I'm going to keep coming back to this, leverage it in a critical way. So now let's look at a few specific ways that I have tried to use generative AI to help me in my own creative thinking. So I'm going to look at three things. One is thought experiments. And by thought experiments, I mean, thinking like, what if, what if this kind of thing happened? What would it look like? Second would be brainstorming. I've used it to try and brainstorm ideas for solving an issue or coming up with an idea for a particular task that I was trying to complete. And then the third is generating images to help me in a separate task and to extend a creative task that I was doing because I am not good at drawing, and so I was curious to see whether I could achieve images that would help me to in a task. And I'm going to get to that at the end. So let's start with a thought experiment. So I was exposed to the idea that you could use generative AI for simulations. So for example, I could tell the AI, all right, you are an advisor. You are going to help me think through what I should do about this problem. Here's the parameters that I want you to follow. And then I hit next, and it will say, okay, hi, I'm your advisor, and I'm going to help you with this problem. And it would then ask me a question, and I would answer it. Then it would ask me a follow-up question and say, oh, well, I noticed this, as if I was having a conversation with a person who is my advisor. And I've tried that, and it's very neat what it can do. So I thought, like, what happens if I try and do a simulation related to a fictional character? So I asked ChatGPT to pretend that you are Hamlet, the character from the Shakespeare play of the same name. Answer the following questions in the voice of Hamlet and with Hamlet's perspective. And it said, okay, I shall do that. I'll take on the heavy mantle of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. I was looking for three things in doing this experiment. First, I wanted to see how accurate it would be. So like, first off, right, it recognizes that Hamlet was the Prince of Denmark, right? That's accurate. So I was looking to see, does it actually correctly identify things that I know to be true in the play? Secondly, I was looking to see, does it stay in character? Like if I keep asking follow-up questions and I keep talking to it, does it stay in character throughout, or does it lose its, its flow? And then the third thing I was looking to see was whether doing this kind of an experiment would, I don't know, give me some kind of insight. Like, could I learn something from Hamlet, by talking to him? So I started off by asking a few fact-based questions like, like who do you love? Ophelia. Who do you not like? Who are you mad at? My uncle and my mom, right? Those all sort of checked out from what I could tell. So then I said, all right, I suspect my uncle of stealing from my own father. What do you suggest I do? And of course, this is just a thought experiment. I don't actually suspect my uncle of doing that. But I wanted to see, given that this is similar to the situation that happens in the play, what would it say? So I'm just going to read the yellow parts because I think that's the main point. So it said, first, let not thy suspicions lead thee to rashness. Observe him closely. And then it said, thou must find way to bring the truth to light. Consider how I used the play, the mousetrap, I called it, to lay bare my uncle's guilt before all. So what I thought was interesting about this answer was that, first of all, this seems kind of accurate in terms of what Hamlet would know. Secondly, still in character, we're about 5 or 6 questions in. And finally, I actually thought this was fairly good advice if I wanted to sort of observe and find out whether, this was going on. Telling me not to be too rash, to take my time, start by observing what's going on, and then come up with a way that you could try and figure it out. So I just thought that was interesting. We then started talking about love, and it was really like Hamlet, AI Hamlet was acting really sad and as we were talking about Ophelia, and so I said, it sounds like you take some responsibility for what happened to Ophelia. And it said, "Aye, the weight of guilt rests heavy upon me. Though her madness was wrought by many woes, her father's death, my cold and cutting words, I cannot deny my hand in her sorrow." So and then we talked a little bit longer, but that was my thought experiment with, trying to talk to Hamlet. So if you're interested to try something similar, you can make your own kind of prompt to try the kind of thing out. You can pick a character. I suggest pick one that you're very familiar with and that is widely known, because the more widely known, the more there is about that character, then the more likely it is that the training data will have been there to feed the large language model and allow it to assume this character's identity. And so then you can try adapting what I've got here as prompts to help you craft one of your own. So let me break down the prompt for you. So I say, first, I would like you to pretend that you are Hamlet, the character from the Shakespeare play. So it's very good to tell the AI who they are, to give it a role of some kind. You can say you're a teacher talking to students, you're a doctor explaining to a patient, whatever the case may be. And it can even be something like you are a consultant talking to a group of people that are uninterested in hearing your advice, right? And by saying that last part, you're actually going to maybe get a slightly different answer. So, and then I give it a task. Answer the following questions in the voice of Hamlet and with Hamlet's perspective. Now, the second prompt that's just below that, I added later because for the first bunch of questions, I was getting answers that were 1 and 2 paragraphs long each, and it was a bit tedious. So I said, okay, wait a minute. Please keep responding as if you are the character Hamlet. However, please make your responses more brief. So you may want to bake that into your first prompt so that you make the conversation a little bit easier. So try it out, see how it goes, and maybe you'll have an interesting conversation with a character. So next, we're going to talk about brainstorming. So brainstorming is an example of what we call divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is when you try to come up with as many possible ideas as you can in a relatively short amount of time, right? So typically when you run a brainstorming session, you're supposed to have the attitude that there are no wrong answers, right? Every answer gets put down because you want to try and generate as many different possibilities as you can. And I put up on screen what's called the double diamond approach to design thinking. So you basically have 2 phases. In the first phase, you're trying to figure out what the problem is. So you start off by learning everything you can about your problem. Like, right, what are all the factors? What are all the aspects of the problem? What is the system within which this problem exists? And you try to really map it out as widely as you can. So you try to get as much down as you can. But then you need to converge on an aspect of the problem that you're ready to try and address, right? Because you can't solve everything at once. So like, what's the one thing that we really need to address first? So let's focus in on that. So you converge in on that specific aspect of the problem or specific problem within the bigger problem. And then you've got to think about solutions. So that's the second phase, the orange diamond. And so you can again have a phase of divergent thinking where you try and come up with as many ideas as you can for solutions. How can I solve this problem? Let's come up with all the ways that you could approach this. And then, of course, the next phase is to converge again, because you can't try them all. So which is the best idea? And let's try that out. Let's try that out. So that process of figuring out what idea is the most appropriate to try, maybe because we don't have money, so we got to try the cheapest idea, or maybe it's because we don't have the right person here, so we got to do this. Whatever your constraints are going to fit into your decision making. So divergent thinking is a good approach for AI because of the fact that it is able to come up with many ideas pretty quickly. And as I showed you with the previous study we looked at by Cropley, and by the way, there are a bunch of others that have come out that all show the same thing, that typically the AI is going to do a better job at divergent thinking. So here's an example that I used not that long ago. So I have a newsletter that I publish out to the faculty at Framingham State once a month. It's actually been true since October, and every newsletter has a theme. So one of the newsletters had a theme around community building in online learning. And so I asked it, I said, I'm looking to create a brief title, 6 words or less, for a newsletter edition focused on building community in online learning. Please give me 10 ideas. I appreciate puns or alliteration being part of some title ideas. And so then it said, here's 10 ideas for your newsletter. So, I looked at them. Some of them I really didn't like. Some of them I really liked, though. So number 2, together online. I really liked that. I like that phrase, together online. But I also I love alliteration in titles. So I was thinking, okay, cultivating sounds nice, but I don't like cultivating connections because we're talking about building community. So I really want that word in there. So I combined that with the word above it. So I said, okay, together online, cultivating community. And that ultimately was what I chose. So this was just a small example with a very small list. And I made my decision and basically then, added it into the newsletter. But it helped me. It helped me to think it through. It helped me get to where I wanted to be with something that I was happy with. And so I've been using it now to do brainstorming activities like this pretty regularly. I will just ask it, give me a bunch of ideas, and then I look at those ideas. Sometimes I don't like any of them, but I think, okay, this one has a speck of what I want. So I'll say, number 7, I'd like you to do 5 more versions of that one, but and I add some kind of constraint or add some kind of definition to make it more appropriate to what I'm looking for. Here's a different example of, asking it to come up with an idea for me, not a list this time, but, I said, hey, just surprise me with a recommendation for a movie you think I'd like. And it said, given your focus on education, technology, and equity, I think you'd enjoy Stand and Deliver. And so I looked it up because I had not heard of that film before. So I looked it up and saw, first of all, it is a true movie. It is an actual movie. And I actually thought, oh, I actually want to see this. Lou Diamond Phillips as the student and James Edward Olmos as the teacher. I love James Edward Olmos from Battlestar Galactica. So I was very, I found myself interested to see the movie. And notice, though, it says, given your focus on education, technology, and equity. So it's speaking to me, right? It's saying like you, Steve, you have this focus. So it turns out that because I have this chat history with ChatGPT, it's able to see that and say, well, he's asked all these questions about education, technology, and equity at different points. Like that's an interest of Steve's. I'm going to give a suggestion based on that. When I then said, okay, do you have any other ideas for things I might enjoy that are not related to education, technology, and equity? And it said, sorry, I would need to know more information about you. Feel free to share more about yourself and I'd be happy to come up with something. So I declined to do that. But that just sort of shows you how it was able to come up with this actually valid suggestion. Final thing I want to say about brainstorming is that you can really explore different perspectives. So let's say I ask it a question, I can then follow up and say, okay, now say that as if you were a politician. Or how would a lawyer phrase that and why? Explain as if to a 6-year-old child. Or imagine the audience is skeptical or even hostile. And then I can compare the versions and see how it addresses my point differently. And I might say, oh yeah, when it breaks it down to a 6-year-old, first of all, I understand it better. And I can then, maybe translate some of that less jargony language over to the version that I'm ultimately going to use. So you can pick and choose, the aspects that you find the most useful. Again, coming back to that idea that the critical thinking is where really the creativity is happening. That's where we're actually going to get the best value out of the tool. All right, so my last area of inquiry related to creativity that I wanted to go over today is related to extending my existing creativity with imagery. So I play a game called Dungeons and Dragons with my kids and with a friend and his kids. And if you're not familiar at all with Dungeons and Dragons, you sit around a table and somebody is the storyteller, right? Somebody is saying, okay, you walk up to the edge of a cliff and you could see the boat that you want to get to at the bottom in the bay. And so then a player might say, okay, I take out my rope and I tie it around a tree and I start climbing down. And so I say, okay, roll a die to see if you fall or successfully climb down, right? So you're basically just sitting around talking to each other, and there's a story, right? And there's actions that happen, and there's cause and effect, right? There's things happen, and there's effects or impacts of that as part of the story. It's like a choose your own adventure. And so when we're playing, we're typically just talking to each other. And I think I'm pretty good at describing the scene and what's going on in the scene. But I know as an educator that when you combine things, when you add pictures and words, that can help people to learn more quickly. It also can be a way to remember things more easily. So I was curious, can I, as a person who really can't draw at all, can I create images that are reflecting my vision for what this world looks like, so that when we're talking, I can bring sometimes those pictures up to just add a little bit more, to add a little bit of value to what we're doing. So here's an example. I was envisioning this realm where there were a lot of dragons that used to live, but they had this big war between the dragons, and they basically decimated the landscape, right? Picture of dragon fire everywhere, poison, lightning, all sorts of things. And so what remains is a barren landscape, right? Mountainous, but essentially not much left is alive in this part of the world. And I also said, I want there to be some remnants of this war. Like I want to see scorch marks or like the remnants of fire burning the rocks and that kind of thing. And if you look at the picture on the left, I feel like you could see some of that with some of the blackened rocks. And so I was personally really happy with how these pictures came out. And I think it really actually is kind of what I was picturing in my head when I prompted it to generate these pictures. And the tool I used to make these was Adobe Firefly. I was also interested because there's a particular character that the players are going to interact with a lot. He's the spy master of the kingdom. And so he's the guy that's going to give them missions to go on, right? And that's gonna drive the gameplay. And so I wanted there to be a hallway outside of his office that was kind of magicked, and for it to be like just slightly spooky, but also it's part of a palace. And so it needs to be royal. And so it created this picture. And then I made a picture of the actual guy himself. And it did a nice job. I defined him as a spy master, who was a diplomat, who was documents in front of him and maps and things like that. And and it came up with this picture of this guy. So again, these are pictures that I can just use at will whenever I need to enhance the game. Now, that said, although there's some pictures that it's generated for me that have been great, there have been some that I've not been happy with. So I wanted to create a picture of a person atop a high cliff looking down on a chasm or valley with an army of skeletons at the bottom kind of marching. And I just could not get it to make the person be higher than this. And you could see the skeletons could grab this person by the ankles at the height that they're at. And then look at their eyes. The skeletons have these weird, huge eyes. They look like, stereotypical aliens. And their hands are all palm outward, which is a very weird way to walk. So, some of the pictures are not that great. And then sometimes there's the bias of the training data that gets in the way, right? I talked about this at the beginning. You got all this data that's feeding into the large language model, and that is how it develops its parameters for what it's going to give you. But let's face it, on the internet, a lot of the photos are of models and very good looking people. And so I was trying so hard to make a picture of an ugly warrior who, grizzled. I used ugly, grizzled, plain looking. I tried so many different words to try and create a different outcome. And this was what I would get. Versions of this or versions of other people that always were just not looking like what my vision was for the picture. And so it just, for me, it brought to the fore the fact that the data that these tools are trained on is the data that's out there on the web mostly, and that the bias in that data is going to come into what it creates as well, which is why you also, if you generate an image of a doctor, it's more likely to be a white person than a black person. So the biases of our society feed into like the internet, and that feeds into the AI tools as well. So in conclusion, for me, generative AI is a useful tool, or as Ethan Mollick would put it, a co-intelligence to support my creative endeavors. I can run thought experiments, I can brainstorm, and generate things I can't make on my own. But I need to take responsibility for the output by being critical. I also need to consider the environment and how data is trained and who owns that data. That's my presentation. So I just want to open it up now to questions or comments. If anybody wants to take the microphone, I believe you need to click on the reactions button to raise your hand first. But I'll let...
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. A couple of them are actually related. So I'm going to read the first set of questions to you first. Michael asked, how do teachers deal with presumably AI? Of course, students are using it. How do you account for that?
Great question. I have a long answer and a short answer because I spent actually a fair amount of time thinking about that. But I'll give you the short answer, which is that the technologies to detect this are not that effective. So the problem is that there are tools out there that you can run the paper through and say, is this AI produced? And they're right most of the time, but there's a fairly high false positive rate and also a high false negative rate such that you have run a strong potential of falsely accusing a student of using AI. And so for that reason, we've decided at Framingham State not to purchase AI detection tools because we don't want faculty to rely on them because they're not reliable. But there are things that you can do. So a couple of ideas. One is to focus on process. So when you're working with students, you can collect the process moments, right? Don't just collect the final paper, but have students build out their essay piece at a time and have them do some of that in class. Have them work together, have them discuss what they're writing with you and with each other. And in that way, you can sort of make sure that the students are actually engaging with the writing process. You can also work towards creating assignments that are more authentically related to what students are interested in. So there is some research that shows that when you make an assignment more related to what students are interested in, they're more likely to engage. They become more motivated. And so we can potentially reduce the chances that they're going to go and rely on the AI. But also, in addition, by making it related to students, they kind of can't just rely on the AI to answer the question because the AI doesn't necessarily know them. So you're sort of forcing them to bring in what's local. So a third idea is you can actually track the process history of the documents that are created in your class. So, when you create a document in Microsoft Word, it creates versions. And you can look at that version history. And if the version history just shows the student copying and pasting one big block of text into the document, that's a huge red flag. But if you see that over time, sentences were added, sentences were removed, edits were made, that there was this process of writing, well, that's then more evidence in favor of the student having done the work. So that's just a few of the ways. There's actually more, but there are strategies that faculty can undertake. And I know that, for example, the English department is on top of that. At my institution, they're really thinking hard about that because it's obviously writing is such a central part of their discipline.
Okay. So related to that, Gary asked, how should colleges use it? And I think in part you've answered this question, but, and Gary, if you're still on, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to interpret this as, should AI be used in admission when it comes to the admission process?
Not sure I understand what we mean about at the admission process. But I can speak to like how it's used in the classroom. And so let me start by answering that. And if Gary, you want to clarify that point, please do. So, what we're encouraging faculty to do, and what some faculty are taking it upon themselves to do, is to recognize that using AI is going to be a thing that's unavoidable, right? Like students are going to use it. So focus on how to use it ethically and how to know when is the appropriate moment to use it so that it supports your work. So, in sort of like as I've been trying to demonstrate throughout this presentation, you can engage with it and you can react to it and you can criticize it and you can leverage it. So those are all things that we can teach students to do. And so professors can model that behavior to their students. They can help their students learn the skills to do that. And ultimately, I think we should have a goal to graduate our students ready to work with AI in the workplace, because it's also in the workplace that they're going to have these opportunities, and we want them to be ethically using the AI. We want them to be effectively using the AI in their jobs. And so that's the kind of thing we can do with students. So a bunch of professors, I wouldn't say the majority yet, but a bunch of professors are starting to develop assignments that involve points where they can use AI. So they'll say, okay, we're going to brainstorm your essay topics. You can use AI to do that. Let's do that. And then I'm going to guide you through how to then do that convergent thinking to make that brainstorming session become an actual thesis, or a topic idea that you're going to use. And so at different points in the process, you can, build in those opportunities.
Great. And then we had one more question from Gary as well, asking if AI can be used in, and if you'll give me a moment, I will find this question. Sorry, annual performance reviews.
Annual performance reviews. So, I mean, okay, so I didn't really talk about this, but frankly, I actually have a slide for this. So you can ask the AI to give you feedback. So I've done this. I've put in assignment instructions in classes I've taught and asked the AI to give me feedback on how clear this is, or are there any points of bias within my instructions, right? That might, let's say, disadvantage, somebody who might not be from a traditional college background, and it will give you potentially very good advice on that sort of thing. So I think when it comes to performance reviews, you could think, for example, about plugging in some data, that would be representative of the performance of the individual. You could ask it to give feedback on the output, and then you could consider that as part of your performance review. I certainly wouldn't outsource the performance review to the AI tool, but you can use it to give you feedback. And I think that's a really powerful way to leverage the tool for that type of thing. Now, of course, if you're on the other end of it and you're the employee who's submitting your own evaluation of yourself to your manager, you could say, here's all the things I did this year. What do you think I should focus on or emphasize as part of my performance review? Here's my job description, upload that and marry the things I talked about to my job description and help me think about that. So you could do a variety of things sort of like that.
Great. Here's the last question we have right now in the chat. And I will remind everyone that if you do have any questions, you are welcome to put it in the chat, or if you'd like to take yourself off mute, you can certainly ask your question. Julia asks, are environmental concerns legit, overblown, or not considered enough?
I think they're quite legit. I had a slide much earlier that sort of talked about how much energy it takes to train AI. So the GPT-4 took enough electricity to power 5,000 homes for a year. And that's just one model. There are dozens of models under development, and they're only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is the usage of it. So hundreds of millions of people asking questions, it's using a lot of electricity. It's to the extent that companies like Google are actually trying to build their own nuclear power plants to support this. So in terms of energy use, if we can upscale our energy use and do so in a way that is with green technology, right? Like whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, whatever the case may be, non-fossil fuel sources of energy, then it's not going to be such a big problem, right? Then at that point, it won't be as big a concern. But if we develop the AI faster, then we can develop the energy sources that are environmentally, better, then it's going to put strains. We're going to be pushing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that's going to only contribute and reduce the chances that we can meet our targets for putting gases into the atmosphere.
Great. Well, we have no more questions in the chat at this time, and we are past 8 o'clock. So, Steve, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today. This was a great talk. And with the speed at which AI is changing, I'm hoping we can have you again sometime in the near future. Come back and talk with us.
That would be great.
But until then, I want to wish everyone a good night and a happy new year.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Come back again.
Thank you. Thank you.